Okay, let's think again now a little more about what we see when we look at migration today. And I want to make 3 points. The first is that when we talk about migration, we are talking about this forced migrants that I mentioned earlier, that is refugees, but also internally displaced people or IDPs. These are people who may have been displaced by conflict or natural disasters like an earthquake or a flooding, but also refugees and others who come across borders, that is forced migrants. These people are often mixed together in this as part of the same flow, the same stream as other kinds of migrants, as labor migrants, economic migrants, people seeking education or to be with their family. And so we think today about mixed migration, where refugees are mixed together with labor migrants and so forth. So um, yeah, it used to be that it was very clear who were refugees and who were IDPs because the refugees would go to camps and so forth. Today, refugees are also going to towns and to the same destination that economic and other kinds of migrants are going to. So we call it mixed migration. The second thing to think of is is that we think about this forced to voluntary piece as part of a spectrum. And here you see a little depiction of how, to what extent people are forced to move as opposed to that they choose to move. On the left edge of this chart, obviously slaves were people who were literally forced to move, right? So slaves are people who were chained and then forced onto boats and moved across the Atlantic and elsewhere within Africa and elsewhere within the world. Trafficking victims are also people who are forced to move. And then we have issues like state-sponsored resettlement, where the government, say for example in Ethiopia or in Cambodia during the time of Phnom Penh, the Khmer Rouge. These were where the state, the government itself, had policies in place that forced people to move around the country as part of a larger development policy or political plan they had. So those are examples of people who were forced to move, right? On the other end of the spectrum are clearly our migrants who just choose to move when it suits them and when they want to. And that the example there is tourists or snowbirds. We call snowbirds people here in America, North America. We call snowbirds people who live in the north, say in Canada or the northern US, when it's summertime and beautiful, and then in the wintertime they move down south where it's nice, just like birds migrate. So those are two opposite ends of the spectrum, obviously forced on the one hand and voluntary on the other. But in the middle, it's much more difficult to figure out whether people are forced or voluntary. Refugees may be forced, but in some cases, there are people from the same town who decide to stay and don't move. So whereas some people in the town may be are forced to leave and become refugees, others may also be subject to the same push factors, but choose not to leave. And similarly, we might think that economic migrants, they may make a decision to leave to go and find a job, but it could be that they are much more forced to leave too, that they really don't have any choices about how they're going to support their families. And so they really are forced to leave because their livelihoods have been destroyed. So let's go back to this screen now. The third piece that I want to talk about when we think about new ways to think about global migration is that it's useful to think about migration in terms of systems. We think of a migration system as a set of places linked by flows and counterflows of people, goods, services, information. And rather than just think that people go from one place to another and that's it, we think about them going from one place maybe to another place, to another place, to another place, and then reaching a destination, spending some time there, moving on, and then perhaps returning. So in the next slide, you see an example of what we call the sub-Saharan migration system. And here we see, say if you go to the right side of the screen, people from Eritrea, which is up there above Ethiopia, those people move in all directions. They move to Ethiopia. They move across Sudan to Libya. They move up through Egypt toward Israel, and then try to make the jump across the Mediterranean. And so you see and then they also return. They return to Eritrea or return to different parts of this. And similarly, on the west side, on the left side of this map, we see again a whole system of movement of people using different routes and different forms of transportation to get across and within and across the Sahel, the western part of Africa. Some of them move to the north to try and make it across to Europe. Others are just moving within Africa. And these flows go back and forth, up and down, in and out, are linked by all kinds of different financial, by transportation, by where their families are. They may spend time along the route, working in some places. So we think about a stepping stone model of migration where people go as far as their money can take them, and they stay and work for a while, then they move on. But usually within the same system, people tend to stay. So yeah, we could spend a lot of time talking about migration systems, but I just want to give you a little taste of that. And finally, on this slide, I wanted to show you where the world's refugees come from. Now, when we think about the whole global system of migration, like we said at the beginning, refugees are a very small number, and 8% of the world's migrants are only refugees. But still, we're talking about millions of people, and this chart on the screen shows you changes over time. It shows you the past 4 years, and it ranks these countries by where people came from. And clearly for the past 4 years, the highest number of people, of refugees, have been Syrians. Second then are Afghans. Third are Somalis, and so it goes, with Africa featuring very highly, but also Myanmar and Iraq. So just to give you a sense of that, if we did the same kind of chart for where the world's migrants are coming from, non-refugees but other kinds of migrants, it would look quite different. This is also this kind of information is available. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because our third module, which I'm calling module 2 here, but I've split it, is going to be about migrants' experiences and responses, and we'll do that in the next